Metroid has always been one of my favorite video game franchises since I was a kid, from Super Metroid to Fusion all the way to the original. I've played almost every single one of them except for Dread. Please don't kill me. And the gameplay of Metroid has always been what sticks out to me, with just how great the games flow together, with each game using a similar format because the combat and mechanics of the game before just worked so well. And the idea of being dropped off on some alien world with a whole planet for you to explore with little to no hand-holding has always been one of the biggest appeals to me, as it makes the world you're exploring just feel that much more alive than they would be without them. And the music surrounding these games have always brought those settings to life, with Super Metroid being a shining example of just how good music and ambience can be put together to make a once-of-a-kind experience work. And almost every single game in this series has been done extremely well, and the atmosphere almost gives it a similar feeling to The Legend of Zelda, but in space, which actually goes into the process of the making of this game. With the whole point of the game being created was to make a game similar to The Legend of Zelda, except it would be more so inspired by sci-fi films like Alien. And the influence Alien had on Metroid might be a little hard to see, but when looking back on the series, you might notice that the series had more elements to it that were horrific than you might actually remember. But before getting onto those elements, remember that if you like this video, make sure to like it and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more. I upload once a week, so if you want to get notified about the new video, make sure to hit the bell icon down below. And a quick note before the video starts, I will really be focusing only on the horrors of the 2D Metroid games in this video, as I feel like the horrors of 3D Metroid could be its own completely different video, as while a lot of the horror elements of the 2D Metroid games connect, the 3D Metroid games are a whole different beast when it comes to horror. And that's just to keep the video fair. It just feels like it would really only be fair to cover those, because while they use a lot of the same elements, it just isn't similar enough for me to cover them both at the same time, because the horror of the 3D Metroid games is just completely different. Now let's get on with the actual video. Starting off with the first game, there really isn't anything scary at first glance. The graphics are just way too low in order for the game to build the creepy atmospheres and ambience that the later entries were able to pull off. But there still is that feeling of emptiness that a lot of the later games are able to capitalize on when the graphical capabilities of the series got better with time. And capitalize that they would, with Metroid 2 really playing heavily into the horror elements that the first game wasn't able to, with the design of the Metroid enemies being really much more otherworldly than anything we saw in the first game. And the dark spaces due to the black and white color filters that the Game Boy was limited to made the atmosphere of the game much darker and down-putting than any other entries in the series thus far. And many of the Metroid bosses were much more alien in design, taking on such features as gaping maws and multiple eyes, with the Queen Metroid being the most disturbing one of them all, looking straight out of H.R. Geiger's handbook with outstretched neck and multiple layers of teeth and eyes. And that is with each monster in the game looking much more distinctly alien and unsettling than anything in the original game. And the environment of this game was much more cramped, making you feel like there was absolutely no place for you to run through, and gives the Metroid layer a almost ant colony type appearance than the open, sprawling sectors of the first game. And I think the tighter appearance of the world, as well as the more alien designs of the Metroids, really add to the horror ambience of the game, but I don't think we really reached the horror elements to the point of actually being somewhat creepy till Super Metroid. I always found the introduction sequence in Super Metroid to be quite unsettling, even when I was a kid, more so than most of the other 2D games that I played when I was younger. The introduction involves Samus leaving the Metroid that she captured from Metroid 2 with a group of scientists, where upon leaving she gets a distress signal from the base. However, upon arriving at the base, she finds every single scientist absolutely slaughtered, and the base looks like it's in complete disrepair, like some sort of beast went through the facility killing everyone one by one. And that is all shown in subtext. If you're really paying attention, you might not see what is frightening about it, but when you really think about it, there's just something unsettling about the atmosphere that the game traps you within. Then upon getting into the final room of the derelict base, you run into the Metroid before the eyes of Ridley appear over the Metroid as it runs away and causes the base to self-destruct. But while I see a lot of people focusing on the intro of the game for the creepy aspect, I think that the rest of the game still has some horrific implications throughout it. For example, when first landing in Zebes, the planet from the original game, we see that the world that was once completely full and overrun with monsters is now completely empty and doesn't have any traces of anything ever being there. We see the remains of the first game still left intact, with the old mother brain layers still there, completely destroyed and looking decayed like the first game happened a long time ago. And while getting missiles, you'll see your first Chozo statue, hitting that the planet might have once had some sort of civilization that now has been completely wiped away by the space pirates. And finally, the last horror element in this section is that upon going up the elevator, you'll notice that once completely still statues turn to look at you, showing that you are in fact not alone and that you've been watched the whole time you've been on this planet. The next horror element doesn't really happen till the first mini-boss, Spore Spawn, when this music kicks in. Which I don't know why this is, but I remember when I first played this game, the music really stuck out to me. And the reason it stuck out to me was that it was quite unsettling, as it makes it feel like there's something much more alien than normal. It's not epic sounding like a lot of the other bosses' music is, but instead much more like you have just walked into something that you shouldn't have. Then there's Kraid, which is intimidating just based off of pure size alone, being a kaiju-sized beast that takes up a whole room, followed by Crocomire, a lizard monster that upon defeat you shoot into an acid pit, causing him to melt into a skeletal form. Finally, there's Phantoon, a ghost squid creature straight out of a Lovecraftian science fiction story, with it being a multi-dimensional creature with a singular bloodshot eye. But while there are creepy elements to Super Metroid, no game would be able to hone the horror of the series better than Metroid Fusion. Unlike other games in the series with much more subtle forms of horror, Metroid Fusion blows the horror up of the franchise to a whole new level. First off, there's the X-Parasites themselves, a shape-shifting blob that upon attaching to a host, it kills them and replicates them into a horrific amalgamation of what they once were. With our introduction to the X-Parasites, we see it nearly kill Samus as they try to take over the suit she is wearing, and the only way that scientists are able to save her is by using Metroid DNA to fend it off, which in turn reveals that the Metroids were really the only main thing keeping the X-Parasites down in the first place. And to make things even worse, we have seen in the other games that we have completely wiped out the Metroid population, meaning that there is truly no way to defeat the X-Parasites. And we get to see the horrific creations of the X-Parasites from the very beginning of us being inside the taken over research station, with one of the first enemies that we run into being the zombie researchers, the corrupted bodies of the formerly human personnel in the research facility. And the game explains that the zombie researchers were most likely considered to be too weak for the X-Parasite and were most likely just used for their knowledge rather than as an actual fighting creature like all the other ones that we see in the game. So we know that the X-Parasite has almost completely taken over the entirety of the research base, and that with the way it behaves, it almost behaves like The Thing from John Carpenter's The Thing. Like in The Thing, the parasites also turn the infected into horrific amalgamations of what they once were and takes over a host that would be helpful to it. And we also see that the X-Parasite is also able to perfectly replicate creatures, which just like The Thing, could be used as some sort of infiltration unit in order to sneak its way into facilities. And the X-Parasites don't need to kill the subject in order to fully imitate them, which we see with the most horrific creature in the game by far. The SAX has got to be one of the most horrific villains put into an E-rated game, because wow, every single scene with it is just straight out of a horror film, with the very first thing that you notice is the loud footsteps it makes when walking into a sector. And unlike all the other enemies in the game, this one doesn't have a distinctly alien appearance to it, instead being an almost perfect replica of you. With every single power-up that you had from Super Metroid and early on in the game, you have nowhere near the amount of resources to consider even taking it on. And it makes you think, is this how every other creature in the other games felt upon seeing Samus? Pure existential dread of something that could easily kill you? Because while it's small in stature, it has the weapons arsenal of an army on its own. And unlike every other enemy that you have to face in the game, you cannot fight back against it. You must hide from the monster. There is no more fighting back against this creature. It's just way more armed and indestructible in comparison to all the other creatures within the game. And if it does happen to spot you, there is no escaping it unless you can really outsmart it. It will stop at nothing in order to make sure you are truly dead. And upon entering a restricted area, you find out they have been breeding Metroids in the facility, but while exploring the facility you run into the SAX, which gets killed by the Metroids, but when running away, Adam reveals this. Then there's the actual fight against the SAX, which while difficult is like you are actually just fighting a version of yourself, before it of course, instead of accepting defeat when you get it down on its knees, it instead turns into this. This part is straight out of The Thing, as the monster is one of the most disturbing in any of the Metroid games thus far, as you realize this thing isn't even close to normal, as it breaks away any chance of being seen as human. But would it surprise you to say that the SX isn't even truly the creepiest part of this game? No, that goes to how the game builds up the bosses in this game. First off, there's Ceres, which before the fight is shown that it moves extremely quickly and that it lives in water, which the area is completely covered in, meaning that it could quite literally be anywhere within the facility. And right before the Saris fight, we see a pile of bones that resemble what we heard about the Saris, and meaning that we know that the original creature does not actually remain. This is going to be some strange and horrific version of it that the X-Parasite has created. And the next boss that raises the fear level is the creature of Nightmare, inside of the frozen area of Sector 5, and while exploring the area of Sector 5, we see behind the windows Nightmare's silhouette flying extremely quickly from one edge of the screen to the another. Then later on within Sector 5, we see that the windows that was once keeping Nightmare out are now completely shattered, leaving the level of protection completely gone as the beast has now completely escaped. And after seeing Nightmare, the worst possible outcome is confirmed as the beast is able to control gravity, and upon attacking the gravity controller, his faceplate will start oozing a green slime out of his eye holes, and then upon destroying the gravity controller, his faceplate explodes off, revealing Nes. And as you damage his face, it melts more and more to the point to essentially just becoming a pile of sludge, and after killing it, once again it's shown to be another X-Parasite, showing that no matter what you kill, everything here is essentially being controlled by the X-Parasite. And finally, it's revealed that the Federation actually sent you here to keep it under control in order to use it for future purposes rather than just eliminate the X-Parasite completely and saving the world from it. This twist reminds me extremely of Alien, where it's revealed that Mother actually knew about this the whole time and that they sent them to the planet for grabbing the creature and bringing it back for weapon purposes. And overall, this really ends up to making Metroid Fusion one of the best examples of horror in the Metroid series. Every single part of Metroid Fusion seems straight out of a film. This doesn't seem as much a sci-fi action game with horror elements and straight up just a horror game. Many stories were able to capture my attention from a very young age, from Smile Dog to the Russian sleep experiment, and then finally of course Sonic.exe. I was a sucker for creepypastas as a kid. I remember listening to people like Some Ordinary Gamers and Mullet Mike narrate their creepypasta for the week and was always enthralled by it, as the stories were just the perfect thing for young me who was just completely obsessed with horror media at the time. And these stories were all over the place, with some being incredible masterpieces of fictions that tell deep and unapologetically frightening displays of horror, while others were trope-filled messes that seemed to fall into the same cliches of hyper-realistic blood and gratuitous violence. But one story really stood out to me from very early on in my journey within the medium, and it involved a character that I loved growing up. That character, of course, being Godzilla, a character that has seen his fair share of disturbing stories, with films like Godzilla 1954, GMK, and more recent adaptations like Shin Godzilla and -1. The character is no stranger to the horror medium. However, there hasn't really been a more directly horror-involved story involving Godzilla like this one, and a twist of events, Godzilla isn't even the villain in the story, he's the hero. That story is of course the NES Godzilla creepypasta, a story which blends the line between reality and fiction a lot better than a lot of the other stories on the creepypasta wiki, as throughout the plot, through its clever usage of sprite work and world building, it leaves you wondering whether it was a hack or completely made up. But before going any further with it, first off, I'd like to thank John X Woodcat for being willing to read off all these excerpts from me, and secondly, remember to like and subscribe to the channel if you like this video, and comment your opinions on the story down below. I really want to hear your thoughts on it, because the feelings around the story generally are pretty mixed because of some parts of it being better than others, and so I really want to know if you think it's a good overall story, if you think it falls apart because of that. Now let's get into the actual story with The story begins with our narrator Zack detailing his love for Godzilla films and how he grew up playing the Godzilla game for the NES, and after a year he traded the game in for another and found himself longing to play his childhood game that he described as being mediocre but lovable. After many years he gets a new NES and his friend Billy gets him a copy of Godzilla Monster of Monsters, which while playing on the first stage, Earth, he describes as being exactly the same as before, with the gameplay loop of destroying bases and killing monsters exactly the same as he remembers it being as a kid. Then he gets to the fight against Godzilla, where it does his typical smacking move that it does in the regular game. However, things quickly go wrong because after it starts attacking, this happens.
This caused the game to glitch up, because once he started smacking me, he never stopped. The timer is supposed to end the fight in about 40 seconds, but this lasted for nearly 5 minutes. After a while, the graphics started to mess up, with little red blocks all over the place.
After resetting the game, things seem to be back to normal, and he defeats Godzilla and Mogera, heading on to Mars, where he notices another strange thing, with Titanosaurus being on the map. See, this wouldn't be so strange, as Titanosaurus is an iconic monster within the Godzilla franchise. However, Titanosaurus was nowhere to be found in the original game. And things get even stranger within the Godzilla fight once again, as during the fight, the Godzilla sprite completely glitches out, as many versions of the eyeballs of Godzilla appear all over the glitched out screen, all a deep shade of red. And things continue to get even stranger with Mogera, as in the fight Mogera is twice its normal size, and after he defeats the mech, this happens.
This happened extremely fast, so I was lucky to get a screen cap of it at all. But what happened was that the giant Mogera sprite started to shatter and melt. I still have no idea what that meant.
And of course, the narrator keeps going through the world and defeats Titanosaurus before moving on to Pathos, and for my first interjection I like to say I love just how the story cares about building the world it is in. The setup is extremely believable and well put together, with it seeming like he could have just found some weird bootleg or ROM hack on accident of Monster of Monsters someone made just to fuck with him. Or maybe his friend Billy, the one who provided the copy, messed with the game as well to play some sort of practical joke, which the story will answer later. Then the way they are able to write the scares off at this point as just being glitches is also masterful, as it allows it to just seem weird, but nothing truly scary at this point. There's an explainable reason for why things are the way they are. And then the sprite work is of course just out of this world. They make every single sprite throughout the story seem like it couldn't be put in the game, and I personally wouldn't bat an eye. But enough of me, now let's move on to... Pathos is where the real horror of the story truly begins, as the first thing he notices about it is off as soon as he gets there. First off, there's Biollante, one of my personal favorites on the map. However, this is stranger to the fact Godzilla vs. Biollante came out in 1989 and Monsters of Monsters came out in 1988, but he throws it aside and just assumes it's a weird marketing stunt. Then the music was also different. It's way more isolating and desolate, as he describes it being like 5 different songs mashed together with the same exact instruments. He then tries to do one of the mountain levels, but finds the levels once filled to the brim with enemies are now completely desolate and a blood-red moon hangs over the mountain range. And then every single mountain level on Pathos followed this exact format, however the orange levels were different, being cave systems filled to the brim with Patango spawns. He then gets to the Mogera and Gezora fights, but the creatures are both malformed versions of their original counterparts, with Mogera being a flying machine that still uses its drill, and Gezora being a fast-moving alien beast that doesn't resemble anything worldly to any degree. Surprisingly, however, Biollante is a much more typical fight, with the monster staying almost completely the same as its film counterpart, never straying away from its original design. However, after defeating Biollante, shit hits the fan for the very first time when he notices this on the world map. He goes over to the level in fear of what could possibly be on there, and when starting the level he sees a hellish landscape with the one single word at the top: run. The first time he opens the level, Godzilla was killed instantly by a creature that he wasn't able to see as he reached down to grab something else, but upon retrialing the level, this happens.
That's when heard a low bellowing sound, and then I saw it. This thing. Do you know that feeling your body has when you feel like you're in extreme danger? You start to recoil and tense up as the adrenaline flows through your veins, and your nerves start to feel very cold. That's the feeling I had when I took this screen cap. I haven't seen all the Godzilla movies, but I'm pretty damn sure this was never in any of them. It had to be something the creators made up. But what kind of sick fuck would put this in a children's game?
And after he sees the creature, which most people refer to as Red, he follows the game's advice and begins running to the right, before eventually outrunning the creature, and upon defeating the stage, he realizes that Mothra still has to complete it. But instead, Mothra is allowed to beat the level without actually completing it, therefore allowing him to move on to the next planet. And once again, I just have to say, wow, the way they're able to keep this going while making it seem like something that could actually happen is incredible. Even with the creature of Red and everything being off, it could still just be explained as some creepy ROM hack and nothing more. It hasn't veered into supernatural aspects, and instead keeps what we are seeing as completely realistic as possible, and I really love that about this story. Also, the design of Red is quite great, as they are able to convey a sense of dread extremely well, which is extremely impressive considering that these are still done with 8-bit sprites at this point. And the feeling upon seeing Red is one of the few that I think hasn't been matched by many other creepypastas, as from the very beginning of you seeing the creature, you realize that something is just off. And this is no longer just slightly off, we are now fully into horror territory, as we know things are only going to get worse from here. And with that being said, let's move on to... Upon entering trance, the narrator realizes this has to be some sort of hack, because while still reeling back from the horrors of Pathos, he notices the monsters that were included are generally the standard fare, Hedorah, Varen, and then Orga? This is extremely strange, as Orga is from Godzilla 2000, a film made in 1999, 11 years after Monster of Monsters came out, therefore there is no possible way that Toho could have known about this character yet. He then opens the first level, which is a question mark, where a face asks random questions and makes a face depend on your answer, asking stuff like,
Do you like the game? Does the moon rotate? Does your dog like the president?
After answering the questions, he goes into the levels which start producing weird and trippy visuals, as well as more disturbing enemies than before, as well as not Mogera appearing randomly in one of the scrolling levels, and something impossible in the normal game. He then runs into disturbing, twisted versions of Hedorah and Varen, looking nothing like their moving counterparts, as now Hedorah is a long skeletal snake creature and Varen is a purple monster with a twisted head that can shoot rockets out of it. And then after defeating the two creatures, he faces off against Orga, who just like in the movie attempts to swallow Godzilla, but he remembers how Godzilla defeats Orga in the film and shoots a beam within it, killing it. However, after defeating Orga, he sees it. Once again, there's a level with Red, and in this level it chases him like before, except this time there's obstacles, and upon jumping over them, Red swallows them whole. And upon defeating the level, he gets excited, and then this happens.
I escaped him yet again. I felt really excited, and so I laughed and said, Not this time, asshole. I decided to take a screen cap to celebrate. But when I said that sentence, just before the level ended, the monster did something that made my blood run cold. It looked at me.
This section is what scared me the most as a kid, as I just remember the look he gave into the camera, and that sent chills down my spine, and with saying that, it's still a great scare. It still sticks in my brain the same way it did when I was a kid. But this leads into one of my first problems with the story. It's setting up a supernatural angle, which one of the things that I have liked about the story so far is it kept it mostly within the real world, as it could have all just been a ROM hack. However, by adding that supernatural element, we now know that this story is impossible and it's instead just another nightmarish scenario that is completely outside the realm of possibility like all the other ones. Now, that's not to say that as a bad thing per se, but I do think this leads to many of the problems that we will get to later within this story. But without getting too far ahead of myself, let's get on to the next chapter, which is... With dementia, the chapter starts with the narrator freaking out about the fact that Red looked at him as he struggles to figure out just exactly why the creature stared directly at him, as this was officially left the realm of possibility in his mind. He then notices 4 monsters on the board: Baragon, Gigan, Manda, and Space Godzilla, and is once again surprised as Manda and Space Godzilla were once again not in the original game. The first section is of course the face with questions again, before a water level with Anguirus where he runs into a couple new monsters and weird level designs, and then with the Godzilla level he runs into more weird and trippy visuals. Then he has another fight with a weird trippy monster, this time being not Baragon, which while in the films Baragon is quite small, this one is gigantic and towers over Godzilla. He normally uses a kick to attack, but when he gets cornered by Godzilla, this happens.
First, he blasts a cloudy breath of pixels down at you, which causes you to freeze. Then he walks back to the right corner of the screen and extends a huge Gatling gun from his abdomen.
After defeating Not Baragon, he goes to a level which he calls the Arctic and runs into more weird and strange creatures like a Spikewalker, Iceman, which looks oddly similar to Not Gazora, and a walrus called Maguma from the obscure kaiju film Gorath. Then he goes to fight Gigan, which from the beginning looks like it's going to be an easy fight. However, this happens. Using his razor-sharp claws, a laser beam, and a howl to try and defeat Anguirus, and with its fast agility, it proves to be a harsh foe for Anguirus, but eventually he's able to defeat him. Then next is Space Godzilla, where nothing truly remarkable happens, just more boss fights. Then finally is another Red level, where this time he has to complete it as Anguirus, where he realizes that he has to outrun Red underwater, no longer just on land, as it revealed that Red can change his form depending on what environment he is in. And after completing, he's able to move on to the next planet. However, to interject, while I still like this story so far, I think this chapter does drag a bit. It does the same thing as previous chapters, and while the new creative and intriguing monster designs really carry this chapter, I think it is overall one of the weaker ones. However, I do like how you can tell this author most definitely has a deep connection with the kaiju subgenre, as he is able to bring in obscure and strange kaijus that most people haven't even heard of at this point. But overall, the story is still going strong. I just think it suffers from middle of the story syndrome. But next we move on to... This is where I started to get worried when I saw this section, as the last chapter had been somewhat of a lull to me, but hopefully this section will prove me wrong and the story will keep going at full steam. The section once again begins with the question face asking him lots of weird and unusual questions before finally asking,
Do you like Mothra?
Upon answering with no, the face gets maniacal and replies with,
"Too bad."
Godzilla is then removed from the map, leaving the narrator with only Mothra, the weakest of all the playable kaiju, and the first level is a strange forest with even stranger creatures, however they are mostly harmless. Things get weird when suddenly a pixel art animation of a kid with a bear head licking an ice cream cone is shown, wearing the same clothes that the narrator used to wear as a kid, and then after touching an hourglass it takes into a dimension filled with clocks and 3-hour glasses. One fills the world with enemies from the past, one with original game enemies, and one with creatures from the future, and upon defeating the creatures from the future, he's taken to a world of smokestacks and pollution. Out of the pollution pops out a oil slick creature, and upon defeating it, the next level is an iceland filled with raptors that kill each other fighting over territory. However, the next level is where things get really strange because the moon appears from the earlier levels, but it lowers, cracking open and revealing a humanoid within, which falls into the water below, and upon dropping into the water, the ground suddenly begins to shake. Out of the water, a giant creature shoots out, which they called the Moon Beast, a massive creature with a floating head, and upon defeat, this happens.
I've been trying to keep my promise and suppress this memory for years, but it seems as if I have to get it off my chest. This is a very painful memory for me. But the game already knows about it, and I think you should too. I'll just tell you the important parts, because I don't like bringing this experience back into my head unless I have to. Back when I was in middle school, I had a girlfriend named Melissa. She suffered from some kind of mental disorder that caused her to go into episodes. When she was in an episode, she would stand or sit perfectly straight and still, and her face would instantly lose any expressions she had before. She would speak very clearly, without any hint of emotion. When it was over, she would start trembling, and sometimes bury her face in her hands, and remain silent for several minutes. I can't really convey the feeling it gave me in words, and I won't try. You had to see this in person to understand. But despite this, she was a very kind person and I cared about her dearly. We liked to hang out in a field at night and look at the stars. But one night, she didn't say anything to me at all. She just stared directly at the moon, trembling. I tried to talk to her, but she suddenly sprung up and ran right into traffic. I tried to stop her, but I was too late. She got hit by a truck and was killed that night. I looked her right in the eyes when the wheels went over her neck. That sight has always haunted me. I know that the game knows about this because after I defeated the Moon Beast, this happened.
And with that is the ending of part 1 of Entropy, and so far I actually forgot just how much I like the twist of the game, knowing the past of the creator and revealing there's a lot more going on within the surface of the story, and that Zack might actually be truthfully an unreliable narrator. We don't know if he's truly telling us everything, and I think that makes the story much more interesting. And I'm also really liking how the story is avoiding cliches, not doing the whole you gotta believe the story with no hyper-realistic blur eyes. This section really dragged me back into the story as it's building on more reasons to actually care about Zack. Overall, a much better segment than the last one, and once again I'm ingrained into what could possibly be next. After that shock, we go back to a weird animation of a fish man seemingly struggling for air, and next is a weird golden maze that Mothra has to go through with more strange monsters and trippy visuals before suddenly escaping. After that is a strange cliffside level where we see more creatures exploring the environment as we see what looks like an ecosystem with birds picking off other monsters. Finally, there's the Batra and Megalon fight, which are fairly normal besides them not being meant to be in the game originally, but nothing too out of the ordinary. Things quickly take a turn for the horrifying, however, when afterwards another animation is shown of someone getting an axe in their face, and then a dark maze where creepy noises that seem to be following him were heard, and upon photo editing reveals this. Then there is a fight with Mechagodzilla, which seems to be going normal before it suddenly reforms into a disturbing beast of a creature with a humanoid head. After defeating it, they are of course taken back to a red maze, where of course red appears, but this time something interesting happens, being this.
However, I did take a screenshot of the red monster doing something I found very interesting. I had managed to lose it by going through a different path than it originally expected, and it was blocked from attacking me by one of the organic walls of the red labyrinth, or so I thought.
After that, Entropy is now over, and I gotta say this chapter as a whole was most likely my favorite of them all. It gave me a reason to care about Zack and showed that there was more depth to him than meets the eye. It also has a lot of great scares, the one in the maze being a personal favorite of mine, and does an excellent job building the world around it, and I think the name of the planet really fits with the section, as entropy is a scientific concept that is mostly associated with a state of disorder, randomness, or uncertainty, as I think the world he finds himself in is random and full of uncertainty. Now let's get on with the next section being... Exodus is more of the same, beginning with Godzilla going to the question face once again and getting asked a couple of questions before asking,
"Would you like a new monster?"
Upon answering yes, they get a new bat monster named Solomon, who is essentially invincible to all the damage that the enemies try to do to him, and after completing another weird and trippy level, this screen pops up. The next level features Godzilla going through a map filled with monsters and pyramids in the background before getting to the end of the map, which has a huge pyramid on it. The huge pyramid then lights up, which causes two monsters to appear, which Godzilla has to quickly defeat. The next two levels are more strange environments that Godzilla and Solomon must go through, with nothing new much being added here. Upon defeating those levels, he seems to have to go through a boss gauntlet of a lot of the same bosses he had to fight before, like Not Gazora and Not Hedorah, as well as some new ones like Kumanga and Gorosaurus. However, things quickly turn a wrong way when he has to face Not Ghidorah, which, while originally just being a door rat, turns into a creature called Chimera, an amalgamation of all the weird creatures from before, and with each health bar removed, a piece of it falls off, until finally only the head remains. The final level is a cemetery, and when getting there, Solomon isn't allowed in, and a blue figure appears over Godzilla. The character is shown as an angel, but suddenly the landscape begins to change, becoming a more hell-like place, leading to Red once again appearing before promptly devouring the angel that we just met. And that is Exodus, and once again this chapter was definitely a weak point to me because while there was a lot of things to like, the new things that were added were more of the same. Just a weird environment with creepy things, but not actually adding to the plot of the story, if that makes sense. I also think the reaction the narrator has to the angel is a bit melodramatic and corny, but you do you. Overall, I think this is one of the weakest chapters by a long shot, and most likely the weakest one so far. But next, the final planet is... Zenith starts the same way as all the others, with him going to the face question guy like normal. They killed him. They killed the face guy. After that, he tries to reach for a new monster when the game literally tells him no, moving it out of his playable reach and then showing an image of a pixelated burnt body. And then Mothra and Godzilla get sent through some hellish sights full of some of the scariest and creepy creatures we have seen so far, with parts of it quite looking like biblical depiction levels of hell. Shit begins to defend as a bunch of creatures blend together, creating this monster bigger than any of the ones before it, attacking Mothra. And the next stage has Anguirus exploring a lake littered with bodies and a corpse hanging, which has a creature split out of it attacking Anguirus. Then for Godzilla's level, he has to deal with a fleshy pit full of tapeworm type creatures that slither and wriggle around the fleshy and deformed landscapes around it.
I think it was about 4 minutes before the end that this level was making me physically sick. The tension was getting to me, and having to take in all these disgusting sights made me want to puke. I nearly did pause the game and look for a bag, but I was able to hold it together.
Next, Solomon has to deal with another hellscape full of monsters, but besides that, the rest of Zen seems to be normal. All the boss fights seem to be unchanged, even this last one. Oh. Fight with Red goes about as expected from the story so far. Red onslaughts the team, eating Mothra and Anguirus near death. Fireballs with faces on them, you know that you're completely fucked when it comes to defeating Red. And it doesn't help that when trying to face it, he is now trapped physically by Red on the couch, and after Solomon seems to defeat Red, Red transforms into an even bigger beast with much more life than before. Red seems to be nearly unstoppable, completely onslaughting every single one of the monsters at every possible turn, even swallowing Godzilla completely whole. But after a game over screen flashes, it glitches out as the angel from before appears, revealing it to be his dead girlfriend Melissa, and then unlocks this new monster in order to defeat Red. This new monster completely sweeps the floor with Red, and upon defeating Red, he set her and all the monsters free, and ends with...
Tears of joy streamed down my face, and I broke out crying. I cried harder than I have in several years, maybe in whole life. All I had been through, all I had discovered, and now the game was coming to an end. But before she and the others left, Melissa had something to tell me. You have saved us. We are forever grateful. We'll be together again. Someday.
Then after a long discussion with himself, he decides to sell the cartridge on eBay instead of actually destroying it. So happily ever after, you might be saying. He won and defeated Red, but see, those final 2 chapters I think caused the entire story to fall completely apart for me. While I thought the hellish landscapes were unique and a lot of the monsters were horrific abominations that really showcased just how good of a monster designer the creator was, I think the goofy ending almost ruined it for me. The switch up from Red completely annihilating the monsters, but then this one singular one being able to sweep the floor with them doesn't seem earned, and the dialogue gets so melodramatic by the end of it that it becomes basically laughable by the end. And it sucks because the rest of the story is insanely unique, creative, and well written, but man does the ending just fall apart, and the whole not being able to move thing didn't feel needed. Yes, it showed that he was actually in danger from Red, but you didn't need to do that not being able to move part. You could have just revealed him killing Melissa, and that would have been sufficient enough to reveal that Red was in fact a real life threat. And the epilogue with him selling the cartridge was completely unneeded, as without the epilogue it would just ended with the monsters being set free, which is a much better conclusion than just selling it on eBay. But I won't let that rather goofy ending ruin it for me. I still love this story, no matter how goofy and over the top the ending is. The world building on display here is levels above everything else around the time and blows many other creepypastas just completely out of the water. The sprite work is nothing short of impeccable, and this shows primarily what I meant last week about imagery and the story needing to work together in order to actually work, as every single image in this pushes the story forward in an interesting way. And while I glazed over a lot of the story, if you want to actually read it and check it out, this story, I would highly recommend it, as it's highly worth a read and earned its spot as one of the top creepypastas for a reason. And the way Red is able to convey fear from the very beginning is something that most other creepypastas aren't even able to dream of, as from the very moment you see him, you know that the guy means business. He is going to stop at nothing to kill Godzilla. And things get even more terrifying with Red, as we know that he can see Zack and that he is not safe behind the screen, added an even more terrifying layer to it than before. And speaking of layers, there's so many hidden meanings behind it, even the naming of the planets. First off, pathos means experience, misfortune, emotion, and condition, and this relates back to the story as we're experiencing firsthand the emotions he is feeling upon seeing the monster for the first time, and the misfortune he is going to be experiencing at the hands of Red. Next up is trance. The story lulls us into a trance as we expect not any supernatural things to happen, but then Red looks at him. For dementia, we see a monster forgotten by time. Maguma, just like many other people that suffer from dementia, forget things with time. I already explained the meaning behind entropy, but Exodus sounds a lot like Exodus, which is the book of the Bible where the Egyptians built the pyramids just like we see in the background of the planet. Then finally, Zenith means high point. This is the high point of the story, as it's the ending. Because of that name, it is fitting for what we are seeing here. So I could completely be pulling on my ass here, but I think there's some meaning behind the names here. I also really liked how before, the glitch seems to almost be sentient, changing and transforming these monsters that we once knew as just that kaijus into horrific amalgamations of what they once were. And it's strange because a lot of the monsters seem to take the appearance similar to other monsters we see later in the story, with Gazora becoming similar to the Iceman and Mogera taking an appearance similar to the future monster in the clock section. I also like how the monsters seem to represent something. With Godzilla, he represents comfort, because when he shows up we know he's in a much better space. However, Mothra represents the complete opposite, representing fear and fragility. And this is made even more apparent in Entropy when Godzilla gets taken away from Zack, leaving him completely alone with Mothra, which is a much more scary situation to be in. Because of that, the story is able to build a layer of fear on its own level within creepypastas, and that is why I think it stands out on its own level compared to all the others. And although I don't think it's a perfect creepypasta, it almost is. Horror has been one of the biggest mainstays of YouTube since the very inception of the platform. There's something just so interesting and intriguing about the way horror is presented on this website that allows viewers to come back for more and more over time. From the very beginning, horror has shown through with some of the earliest viral videos on the platform being horror focused, and while YouTube horror has gone through many stages over the years, from SCPs to creepypastas and now finally to in-log horror, none are as strange and as intriguing as the earliest form of horror on YouTube. And there really isn't a name for it besides lost footage. Almost every single one of these early YouTube horror films feel like something you would come across while looking through a video rental store completely unlabeled. There's just something so off about the way early YouTube horror was done and hasn't really been able to be replicated since. There just isn't really much for you to latch onto for safety, with many of them not having a plot whatsoever, allowing your brain to see it like an almost cursed videotape. But what really makes many of them stand out is the atmosphere within all of them. I don't know what it is about it, but the really low budget feel and the atmosphere nature of all these videos make them feel even more uncomfortable than they would be without it. And the almost home movie feel to it actually adds to the atmosphere, as it feels way creepier to the fact it feels more real because of it. And many of the videos just feel off, like you shouldn't be watching them and that you stumbled upon something you shouldn't have. And many of the best ones of these utilize silence or extremely wide shots just to give an off feeling to everything that you are seeing. And the style of horror that is shown in these is way weirder than we're used to, as it's something that's so low budget and lo-fi to it that it doesn't feel like anything else we've had since. And that really adds to the horror of a lot of these, as it feels like something that you're not supposed to see. And because of that, in this video I wanted to revisit some of the classics of early YouTube horror, but before getting into the main section, I wanted to say thank you all to the new subscribers of the channel. I didn't expect to hit 1,000, let alone 2,000 that quickly. I'm still just in shock by how many subscribers came from that video, and I just wanted to say thank you all for joining, and I'm so happy that you picked my channel to follow. And if you're new here, remember to like and subscribe if you liked the video, and let me know down in the comments below what you thought on the video. Now let's get on to the main video, with the first video being There Is Nothing is a 2006 short experimental horror film, and it follows a girl in a dining room with flames in the windows behind her, and at first what she says is reversed, unable to be understood. Some creepy music plays in the background which helps with the creepy ambience of the area, but before we can figure out what is going on, she suddenly slams her head into the bowl in front of her. Camera then proceeds to pan out, giving us distance from her and allowing us to see the bowl in front of us, like we were trapped in the same hell, just like her. Then the camera pans back forward where she says, "There is nothing," before deadpan staring into the camera and closing her eyes. There's just something so off-putting about this short that is hard to put into words. I don't know if it's the dead eyes when she stares back into the camera, or if it's the way the flames seem to surround her in the background, making it look like she's in hell, but all I know is that it makes me extremely uncomfortable while I'm watching it. The way she deadpan stares into the camera, it almost reads like she's reading into my soul. And it doesn't help that there isn't much background noise besides the weird ambient music. And it just makes the whole experience of the video just that much more uncomfortable, because you can't escape her. She is in the middle of the screen. There's nowhere that you can look away from her. And the reason why I say the film is experimental is the experimental aspect of the film is that if you play it forward then backwards, the film is exactly the same both ways. Because of that, if you were to watch it multiple times over, it would be a perfect loop. And I think that really adds to the actual horror of it even more than if it didn't, as it almost like it symbolizes that she's trapped in her own hell, repeating the same actions over and over again for eternity, no matter what she does. She can't escape where she is at. She is stuck in that dining room forever, which makes it that much more scary. And what surprised me when researching this short film is that in fact that was a real person playing the woman. I thought for sure that with the weird, almost mechanical movements of the woman and playing hard into the uncanny valley, that she was going to be an animatronic and not a real person. And when I say she plays hard into the uncanny valley, you really feel extremely uncomfortable every time she looks towards the camera. You can tell she's supposed to represent something human, but just doesn't feel human while watching it, if that makes sense. And because of all those reasons, There Is Nothing sticks in my mind as one of the best and creepiest of the early YouTube horror shorts. But an even shorter film that came out around the same time was able to scare me just as much, if not more, and that is Hey Walter is a short video that starts off somewhat ambiguous, with not much going on in it, as a man describes to his friend Walter about a girl he met at the mall. But as he goes along, we see the man get more and more increasingly unhinged as he describes what he did at the mall with the girl. And about halfway through his unhinged rant, he starts to talk about wanting to show Walter the girlfriend. And this is where things start to become really uncomfortable, as you really don't know what is going to be shown next. You can tell it's not going to be something good, but it's really off-putting the way he's acting, almost like he knows what he's about to show is really messed up, but no one else is going to enjoy it except for him. After he tells the camera he wants to show his friend the girl that he brought home from the mall, it is revealed that he has her tied up in the basement, bound and gagged. He then walks into the room with the girl and slams the door behind him, and that's when the video ends. And you may be thinking, ABA, why would you show this? It feels like this could be real and not just a horror short. Well, people did in fact think this was real for the longest time. And people even began to link it back to an actual missing person case, and even the police got involved at a certain point, but it was later revealed to be completely false.
I will say that it has been completely debunked, and this is just in fact just a normal short horror video. None of this is real. Even though there was a girl that they thought could possibly be the girl in the video, that was completely debunked and is in fact the creator's girlfriend. That doesn't mean the video is not one of the most disturbing ones you can find on the platform, because just how well they make it look real. Like seriously, when you are watching this, you start to figure out just what's going on just by his body language alone. The acting in the short video is top notch because you can tell something about him just seems off from the very beginning, and as this rant gets more and more unhinged as it goes along, allowing you to figure out that something about him is just not right. And then the final reveal at the end is executed almost perfectly. The girl's acting makes you believe this is real footage of a stolen girl, which makes the short that much creepier, and overall it's really impressive just how scary and realistic he was able to make the atmosphere in 50 seconds. Like seriously, this segment is already longer than the video itself. It's only a 50-second long video, and it is able to be extremely frightening in that 50 seconds. And that is why Hey Walter will always be remembered as one of the creepiest videos in early YouTube, but one video does atmosphere way better than Hey Walter, and that is... Finally, there is of course I Feel Fantastic, and it is the earliest video we'll be covering in this video, and it's a music video from 2004 following Tara the Android, as she tries to sing her song called I Feel Fantastic with incredibly uncomfortable visuals that go along with it of her singing the song as she tries to replicate poses of a human woman. But where a lot of the mystery of the video comes from is this random shot about halfway through the video where it cuts to this. You can see what looks to be a woods, probably someone's backyard, and this shot comes completely out of left field, adding to the weirdness of the video before immediately cutting back to Tara the Android. And people started to wonder about the creation of this video due to the extremely weird and creepy atmosphere that the android possesses and the random shot of the woods, which caused the people to wonder if maybe the video was made by a murderer and that the woods was where he was hiding the bodies in almost a mockery of his victims. The theory of it actually being a murderer trying to show off his victim count is of course completely and utterly false once again. This was an urban legend that was spread about the video around the time, but is completely and utterly false in every single way. This is just a weird video, with the actual source of the video being a DVD from back in 2004, which included more songs of the singing android, which are all just as uncomfortable as the first one. And you can actually find the full video online, and I will link it in the description down below. It's an interesting watch because every single one of them is also creepy as well and really tap into that uncomfortable feeling. But what makes I Feel Fantastic stand out is that random shot of the woods as well, which adds another layer of mystery to the weird video. But with the weird singing along with extremely disorienting music combined perfectly with the weird ambience of the animatronic, it allows the video to be as creepy and as effective as possible. And once again, like all the others, this video taps perfectly into the uncanny valley, just like There's Nothing also did, because of the extremely stunted and weird movements of the animatronic. And because of the way it seemingly is trying to imitate human movement and speech, it makes your brain recognize it as something trying to be human, but when by appearance you can tell it's just something attempting to be human. And just like all the others, something is just completely off about it, and let me show why I think these are so similar to one another and why they work so well. So in conclusion, I think what makes all these horror videos work so well is the atmospheres they are able to create with the way they are shot and set up, even with some of them not intending to be frightening in the first place. For example, I Feel Fantastic is not even intended to be a horror video, but the way the ambience and the atmosphere of the video surrounds the android, it just allows it to be as creepy as possible. They usually play heavily into the uncanny valley or mystery, allowing them to seep into your mind and fuck with you for a while after viewing. They also generally don't explain anything to you, allowing you to try and figure things out yourself, which I think makes the horror much scarier than it would be if it tried to explain every detail of what's going on to you. I Feel Fantastic and There Is Nothing both drop you into worlds with almost no human entities that play with the part of your brain that recognize the creatures as human, but slightly off, allowing you to feel the uncanny valley to an extreme degree. They also generally all use an uncomfortable amount of silence, so you're essentially being left there all alone with your brain, allowing it to build tension as your mind begins to wonder what could possibly be going on. See, for horror, silence is the strongest tool because nothing that can be shown visually will ever be as scary as what your own brain can think up of. And because of all that, I think while a lot of the early YouTube horror videos are quite strange, they have a certain charm to them that a lot of the newer horror videos on the platform are missing now.
It's common knowledge now that horror on YouTube used to be a stranger place than it is now, with many of the older horror videos not having the traditional genres that we see on YouTube today. For example, in my last video on this subject, we talked about I Feel Fantastic, There Is Nothing, and Hey Walter, all of which, while falling underneath the umbrella of YouTube horror, have much different looks and feels from one another. Now, a lot of horror on YouTube can be lumped into categories, with things like the more traditional short horror film to the more YouTube-centered varieties such as digital horror and analog horror. That cannot be said for the videos that we are covering today, so let's get into them. Body of a Pig is a fairly simple story to follow, with a group of guys exploring an abandoned facility with an EVP as they try to find any evidence of the paranormal that many people claim is hidden within the facility. While exploring, they hear a noise, which upon clearing up and slowing down the audio reveals that there's a recording saying this. Upon inspection later, they realize that one of them had taken a photo while in the location, which upon inspection also reveals this. This video legitimately got me the very first time I had watched it when I was much younger. That final scare and build-up really adds to the horror of the video, and I still find myself occasionally getting chills upon rewatching it. The music and weird sounds really add to the atmosphere that they are exploring somewhere that they really shouldn't be, and really can make you feel uncomfortable the first go around. And the final reveal is legitimately frightening, catching me completely off guard the first time I watched it, and I don't know if it was just me, but it just creeped the hell out of me. However, like a lot of horror, after you know the scare within the video, the horror is lost, and there are other things that break the tension as well within it. For example, I know when I showed it to my friends a couple of years back, what really took them out of it was the poor grammar and weird storytelling that, looking back upon it, doesn't make much sense, with the opening title crawl being an excellent example of this. This video is like a lot of the other weird early YouTube horror videos, where a lot of the scares come from surprising your friends with this creepy video that you found, which this video does a really good job at, frankly. It works extremely well if you have no idea what's going on within the video, and if you watch this video completely alone in a dark room, this video can really get to you. And of course, to end this section, this video is not real. I've seen a lot of people try it and claim that it is, but it is in fact not real whatsoever. The guy who made this also makes other fake ghost hunting videos. This one just happens to be the most famous, but overall an extremely effective scare with a great buildup and even better payoff. And because of that, I will give it a 6 out of 10. Anyone who has followed this channel for a while already probably knows my opinions on username 666, as I had already talked about one of the other videos made by Nana, that of course being the My House walkthrough, which I covered in the video, the scariest video that you haven't seen before, but the chances are you most likely have watched this one. Username 666 is based off the urban legend that used to be on YouTube that if you searched up the username 666, it would at first say that the user did not exist, but if you kept reloading the page, then eventually the user would appear, and upon opening the channel, the devil would take your soul. This is essentially what Nana shows, but also shows a lot of horrific imagery such as demonic babies twisting their heads around and a lady drowning within a painting. And upon seeing this, the person watching begins to freak out and tries to rapidly escape the page, but is unable to before a hand flies into the screen reaching through, which causes the video to abruptly end, going with the ending of the urban legend, that being the devil pulling you in through the TV screen. I remember when this video first came out, just how much it was shared around as proof that the urban legend was real, and the video does an excellent job at portraying the urban legend, doing an almost one-to-one recreation of it, with the videos that are being shown being quite disturbing, really playing into the effects and atmosphere that Nana is widely known for with all of their videos. And just like in the My House walkthrough, Nana creates this atmosphere of hell that is really like unable to be compared to with any other YouTube video. And besides the visuals, what I think truly makes this video stand out is the audio, as the audio within the video is just truly unrelenting, not letting up whatsoever throughout the 3-minute runtime, showcasing the pure brutality of the videos. And this video still holds up quite well. with the atmosphere and pacing of the horror within this video being nearly perfect, with an easy to understand setup and an interesting payoff. And the open-endedness of the story also really helps the atmosphere of the story, as we don't truly know whether or not the poster made it out alive, or whether or not now we are also cursed due to viewing the video. And the video also does an excellent job of leaving us with more questions than answers, something that horror is really good at, as the more questions you are left with, the more your brain will try to wander looking for the answer. And something you always need to remember as a horror creator is something your brain can conjure up is infinitely more frightening than any filmmaker is able to portray on screen. That is precisely what makes Lovecraftian horror just so effective. You cannot show anything that is more scary than anything our imagination comes up with. And with the way that the horror flows and is set up within the video, and the nearly perfect sound design with the video, perfectly adds to the tension. And with all that being said, I have to give it the score of 8 out of 10. Seriously. Go check this one out if you haven't. You're missing out on a lot of horror lore if you haven't seen this video. This is one of the most famous horror videos for a reason. And with all that being said, let's get on to the next one.
Beneath the skin, we are already one.
Okay, I kind of included this one because I find it funny overall. This video is pretty simple. It's quite literally a talking loaf of bread with the demon speech from Legend. You know, the scene where he talks about the unicorn, and then occasionally there's interlaced footage of a puppet freaking out and speaking backwards. It's overall pretty goofy, and I don't believe it's meant to be taken seriously, but you never know. I just always see it in old creepy horror video playlists, and if this actually creeps you out, let me know, but I just think it's overall pretty funny. I just find the idea of the loaf of bread saying like satanic things pretty funny. But if this video actually creeped you out, let me know down in the comments. And now let's get on to the next one. Another quickie video here, but it's just the drill sergeant and recruit from Full Metal Jacket, where the sergeant asks to see his war face, but instead of that, their faces are replaced with what looks to be the most fucked up mannequins in existence. I absolutely fucking hate this video. I don't know what about the faces fucks me up so bad, but it just triggers a crazy fight or flight for me. It's such a simple video, yet it's just so damn effective, and I think this video is a showcase of me having the uncanny valley, because I showed this to a friend once and they just laughed, so I might just be a wimp. But overall, yeah, this video fucked with me for a long time, and it's just such a simple thing, but it's really creepy to me. I don't know why. 6 out of 10. This video opens up with a warning reading. In the year 2571, a video cassette was found in a pile of rubble on the ruins of a blue planet. What you are about to witness will not be the contents of the aforementioned cassette. This is an entirely different recording. It then cuts to footage of a weird television program with extremely loud funk music playing in the background before suddenly a loud scream cuts as we hear what sounds like a man struggling and screaming in pain like he is being tortured, with him only getting louder and louder as the video goes along. And the visuals of the VHS get even more distorted and weird as the program animation gets more and more distorted as time goes along. By the end of the video, the footage is completely ruined with little to no visuals being recognizable, with the static and grain overwhelming the screen. And to talk about my thoughts on this video, there's something you need to understand first. This video is a parody, and not meant to be taken seriously. I seriously don't understand why most people seem to think that this is a real attempt at horror, because I think the beginning of the video really spells out this video is just going to be a parody. I mean, come on. It sets up a scary idea of the film being taped from a destroyed planet, but completely throws that concept away. It's not meant to be taken seriously. I think personally that this video was made in response to a lot of the bad horror YouTube videos that came around in the mid-2000s when the creepypasta movement was rapidly dying. There was a lot of videos that tried to portray the same topics in an extremely serious light, and I think this video is essentially just mocking them. And honestly, I think the joke works, as this is what seemed like every single horror video was like back then, with a cartoon being altered to be slightly scary. It reminds me a lot of the Family Guy analog horror that was released a little while back, where it mocked all the cliches that were common within the analog horror subgenre. It's not meant to be taken seriously, thus I can't rate it super seriously, so I'll give it a 5 out of 10. And to conclude this video, you can see a lot of these horror videos from the past have one thing really in common, and that is that they are just plain strange. I don't really think that there's anything like it out right now, and that honestly might be a good thing, as it allows an air of nostalgia when watching these videos due to just how different they are from the stuff now. A couple of weeks ago, I covered a creepypasta that got famous that was particularly terrible, that of course being Sonic.exe, which follows a guy finding a haunted version of the original Sonic game, which kills off each famous characters from the game in increasingly gruesome ways. Now, that wasn't the only terrible Sonic-based creepypasta that rapidly blew up in popularity in the early 2010s. No, there was another one that was even worse, that even makes Sonic.exe look good. That of course being... Since this story is so short, I think it would be best if I just read through the whole story with some insertions with my thoughts on what happens within it, as I think while the vast majority of people know that there was a creepypasta written about it, I don't think the vast majority of people have actually read it. So here it goes. Gil and his friend Noah were looking for games for their Sega Saturn at EB Games when they came across Sonic R. Gil was going to ask how much it was, but when he got to the counter, the salesperson said to them to take the game for free and get out. When Noah heard the salesperson say, "Take the game with you," he dropped the games he was looking at and ran over to Gil. "Did he say we could have the games for free?" he asked. Gil was going to shake his head no when the salesperson interjected and said yes. Noah grabbed Gil by his arm and pulled them out of the store and to his house. And for my first interjection, of course the story starts off with the cliche started by Ben Drowned, that of course being some sort of creepy old person or salesperson giving the main characters of the game for free without actually explaining what's wrong with it in the first place. I really dislike this cliche because it would just never happen in the first place. No guy is going to act that strange or weird when it comes to giving something away. It's too suspicious or weird, and if someone did that to me, I would not take the game. It's just way too suspicious for someone to act that way. It just doesn't make sense for someone to behave that way, and it's just not how human beings behave, and the dialogue is also super unrealistic and laughable. Now, let's continue. When they got to Noah's house, Noah got a Sega Saturn and Sonic R and put the game in. When the game started, they didn't see Sonic or Knuckles, they only saw what looked like Tails. Noah just thought it was a glitch, or that someone hacked it, but Gil knew it was more than a glitch or a hacked game, something much more evil. The first thing they noticed when Noah started the first race was that the track was fully dark red and black, and the music that was playing was Can You Feel the Sunshine, but played backwards. Noah thought it was a hack, but Gil thought the game was haunted. And he did not think that their copy was the only haunted version of the game. He thought all of the versions were haunted by Tails.
When Noah beat the first race, he unlocked Supersonic. Gil knew that Noah didn't get all the 7 Chaos Emeralds, but Noah didn't question how he got him. But he did stand up and cheered for himself. "How did you unlock him so quickly?" asked Gil. "I don't know," Noah screamed excitedly. "Why are you questioning it, Gil?" "Something feels weird about this game," Gil said. "The game feels haunted or something." "You've been watching too many horror movies," Noah said. "You know I don't watch that stuff, Noah," Gil replied. Noah finished his second race with Supersonic when the game said a challenger was approaching, and when the challenger approaching screen faded away, the screen faded into black and stayed black for about 2 minutes. It then cuts to a picture of Sonic being violently attacked by what looked to be a stuffed animal versions of Tails with very loud screaming and laughter for a split second, and then it went to the race. And for my second interjection, this part made me laugh due to just how stupid and overdone this aspect of the story is. The background music has been done to death in horror, and for it to actually be scary, it has to be done in an original way, which this does not, instead copying the story beat almost exactly from Sonic.exe, which is the exact same scare that this one does. It also rips the story beat of Sonic being killed by the Tails doll from Sonic.exe as well, which does the exact same scare when Sonic kills Tails. This makes me wonder why someone would rip off an already bad story and expect it to be any better, but the answer is pretty obvious why. It's because Sonic.exe was just so popular that this creator wanted to cash in on that success. And in all honesty, their plan worked, as I have actually heard of this story, and it's fairly popular, of course for all the wrong reasons now. And it continues with the really hokey dialogue that's, once again, literally no one talks like. It explains every single piece of context that we need, and it's kind of just over-explaining everything. It's essentially repeating itself over and over again, and it just seems like it's just trying to tread out the length. But let's continue. When the race started, Supersonic was standing on the track by himself after the ready, set, go was said. Supersonic started to move by himself. Gil looked over to Noah and saw that his hands weren't on the controller, and as soon as Supersonic crossed the finish line, Noah was able to control him, and what looked like Tails was right behind him. When Supersonic and Tails crossed the finish line, it looked like Tails won, but it said Supersonic won. That's when it said they unlocked the Tails doll, and the Tails doll cursed. When this happened, Noah and Gil looked very confused. "Is that a letter?" Noah asked Gil, and all Gil could do was nod his head. Noah went to play as the Tails doll when the letter opened up. Okay, this is just a personal pet peeve of mine, but I think the usage of the title within this story is extremely lame and unscary to me. And I think it would be much more creepy if the scene would have just ended with the Tails doll being unlocked. It would have added an extra layer of mystery to what's going on rather than explain that they are quite literally now cursed by the game. Whatever you do, don't read that letter, Gil warned Noah. But Noah didn't listen and read it anyways. What it read was, "Can you feel the sunshine?" lyrics backwards. When Noah was done, the TV started to vibrate. Noah took a hammer and started to hit the TV with it. The TV stopped vibrating. "I stopped the TV from vibrating," Noah said. "Yes, but how do we play the game now?" Gil said. "I have a TV in my room," Noah said as he unplugged the system from the now broken TV and wall. "You do know that your mom and dad are going to kill you for breaking the TV," Gil said. "I know," Noah said, "but it was worth it." Okay, so this is so over the top and ridiculous that it's hilarious. Why would your first reaction to hearing a song be to smash the damn TV? Not one person would behave in that way. It's super unrealistic and so overdramatic that there's no way for me to take this seriously. They went up the stairs to Noah's bedroom, and when they got to Noah's bedroom, the broken TV started to vibrate again, and then the Tails doll came out. Noah and Gil were now playing a different game because of what happened. They were playing Sonic Adventure 2 on the Dreamcast when the doorbell rang. Noah and Gil went to answer the door. When they opened it, no one was there. Noah closed the door when the doorbell rang again. Noah opened the door, and no one was there again. He closed the door, but kept his hands on the door. The doorbell rang again, and Noah opened the door as fast as he could, but no one was there. The only thing that was there was a Tails doll. And this is about the point where I knew this story was completely unsalvageable. It does the exact same plushie scare that was used in Sonic.exe, a scare that I hated in that story and hate here. It is just not frightening, and it's frankly laughable in every single way. But let's continue with this obviously terrible story. Noah brought it inside the house and washed what looked like blood off of it in the kitchen sink. When he washed the blood off, he set it up in front of a couple dishes to dry and went upstairs. That's when the Tails doll stood up and flew off the counter and onto the floor. He then walked up the stairs and he flew up them. Then he went to Noah's bedroom. Gil then felt like they were both being watched by something evil. "Hey Noah, do you feel like we're being watched?" Gil asked Noah. "Are you sure you don't watch horror movies?" Noah asked Gil. "Of course, I'm sure," Gil said. "I have to go to the bathroom," Gil said. As he walked to the bathroom, he saw something out of the corner of his eyes. It looked like a Tails doll, so he turned towards his left and didn't see anything. He looked to his right and didn't see anything. Then he thought it was his imagination and went to the bathroom. When he was going back to the bedroom, he saw something move, so he went to go see what it was. He then saw it move again and walked towards it. Gil saw the Tails doll and walked over to pick it up and bring it to the room. When he brought it up and showed Noah, Noah asked Gil, "Where did you find it?" "I found it by the stairs," Gil said. "I thought I left it in the kitchen." "Anyway, let's play Sonic R again," Noah said. "Don't you remember what happened before?" Gil replied. And to interject again, this scare is still not scary. It's just them finding the bloody Tails doll again. It wasn't spooky the first time, and wasn't the second. You also may not be able to tell, as I've edited the story a little bit to make it more coherent, but there's spelling errors and grammar issues everywhere within the story. This paragraph especially being horribly written. But let's continue. "Yeah, so?" Noah said. "So do you want to kill your TV too?" Gil said. "That was a freak accident," Noah said as he put the game in the Sega Saturn. He then played the tag game as the Tails doll, and as soon as he tags the last person, the Tails doll that was in the room came to life. Noah and Gil both stood up and walked towards the door. Noah opened it as they both ran as fast as they could down the stairs, and almost got to the front door when the Tails doll fell in front of them and killed Noah with his razor-sharp claws. This made Gil very angry, and he grabbed a baseball bat and started swinging at the Tails doll, each hit missing. He swung it one last time before the Tails doll caught it and broke it. I could just not stop laughing while reading this section for the first time. Like, how can anyone take this seriously? There's no way any sane person reads this and finds this frightening. It feels like a strange attempt at an action sequence and just doesn't make any sense. This ending feels extremely rushed and so over the top that I don't know how this story gained any sort of popularity in the first place, like genuinely. Gil then stepped on its head and ran to the kitchen to get one of the kitchen knives and swung at the doll again. The Tails doll caught it again and killed Gil. The Tails doll went back into the upstairs TV. The police then came to the house because the neighbors called saying they heard a noise coming from Noah's house. When they got there, Noah and Gil were both upstairs in Noah's bedroom. One of the police officers took the Sega Saturn to the station and his partner said that there was no murder weapon. And that is the Tails doll curse. And before giving my full opinions on the story, I want to know what your thoughts on it, because I think it's terrible. And let me know in the comments down below. And to summarize my thoughts really quickly, it's just awful. It has next to no redeeming qualities whatsoever. Half the story beats are taken directly from other stories, and the ones that aren't are so over the top and edgy that you cannot take them seriously. In its final state, it actually makes Sonic.exe seem like a more interesting story, and that's frankly impressive to me. So how this story got popular is honestly beyond me, and the fact that it fails this bad is what makes it so funny. It tries so hard to be intimidating in any way and fails at literally every aspect. It needs so much work that honestly, in order to make it work, the story would need a full rewrite and changing of every single story beat. The dialogue is abhorrent and unrealistic, as well as the action of the characters. The story just fails at every action it tries to present, and in all honesty, feels like someone wrote it in 15 minutes. And with all that being said, make sure that if you like this video to subscribe, and I'll see you all next week. The Want Files has always been something that's been on my radar ever since I've started covering analog horror, as it's always seemed to be sort of an outlier within the subgenre. Unlike a lot of the other analog horror series that I've covered, it has a more traditional approach to storytelling, conveying its story in a straightforward way rather than cryptic messages and text walls. It's almost fully animated, and with each episode it seemed to improve greatly as the animation quality went from super low quality, that was super low budget, to creepy and highly detailed rather quickly.
And even before the animation went up in quality, it still was more interesting than many of the other things I was asked to cover, and I could see past the lower quality of the animation because of the storytelling ability. However, while the main storyline was interesting, one of my personal favorites from the series was a one-off called The Mysterious House, which I have talked about in some of my other videos, which followed two kids going into a creepy, almost abandoned house where they would run into a tall orange rabbit and a sheep named the Watermans, who later that night would brutally murder them one by one. It's a classic example of stranger danger, and it was told in a way that made sense for the format. But to continue, what slowly started off as just another FNAF-style VHS series has fully fleshed out into a more intriguing and new world to explore. But as the animation got better and better, I got more and more excited for a new episode to come out, and then finally on October 31st, the long-awaited sequel to The Mysterious House came out. So before going into this section, seriously, spoiler warning, I will be doing a full recap here, so if you haven't watched it yet, then go watch it now. My video can wait. Go watch it, and then come back. Also make sure if you aren't subscribed already to subscribe to the channel and like the video if you enjoy it. Okay, now that that's over with, the Return of the Pumpkin Rabbit begins with a group of trick-or-treaters, Jay, Dino, Ralph, and Paco, all going to the mysterious house, where upon arrival Jay explains the background of the house, which is, of course, that multiple groups of children went missing upon the meeting of the Watermans, but it's revealed that after Ducky and Tammy, the kids from the original mysterious house, went missing, parents took the Watermans and burned them alive in the town square. Then, despite Ralph's pleas, all of them except Ralph enter the house, where upon arrival they light a jack-o'-lantern, which causes a television to turn on in the room next door. When they walk into the room, they see Mrs. Waterman. However, she is beyond mangled and all stitched up and looking like more of a moving corpse rather than a living person. She looks distinctly different from the other characters in this, with a more animalistic design. She tells them to get candy from the kitchen, and while the other kids leave, Dino steals the Waterman's photo book. Then Paco also splits from Jay after seeing Ducky, who tells them he can get him out of the house. It then cuts back to Ralph, the person who was left behind, who is exploring outside and goes through a pumpkin patch where he gets chased and killed by the pumpkin rabbit in front of the decapitated corpse of Tammy, the original girl from the first short, who is now being used as a scarecrow. When Jay then realizes she is completely and utterly alone, she decides to hide, and Paco continues to follow Ducky, looking a bit different than he did before, to say the least. Upon following Ducky, we see multiple pictures of the missing children, and the room Ducky leads Paco into is in fact not an exit, but a bedroom. The same bedroom that he was in the original short. Ducky then says the same phrase that we have heard multiple times throughout the short.
Mr. and Mrs. Waterman were very, very fast people.
The song Hush Little Baby begins to play, and a hand reaches out from under the bed with the lights all going out and all the doors locking, leaving Paco all alone in the bedroom. Back to Jay, who is hiding behind a cupboard, crying, when she hears what sounds like Ralph, but upon peeling the cupboard back, it's revealed to be this. He then jumps after her and chases her, but she escapes after hitting him in the head with a mug. She runs into Dino, who shows her the book from the armchair, which is covered in photos of their previous victims, and a new photo is in there, one of their entire group as they are walking inside. The song When All the Saints Go Marching In starts playing, where they find a body of one of the missing kids playing the record, as well as another one strung up behind a door. Inside the kid's body they find a key. After that, one of the doors in the hallway unlocks with it, leading to a room with pieces of the missing children's costumes put on mannequins. Almost like each of the mannequins, each represent one of the Waterman's victims. However, unbeknownst to Jay, the pumpkin rabbit is in the room and repeats the phrase that is said multiple times, being,
Mr. and Mrs. Waterman were very, very, very bad people.
They then run away when they find the bloody disguise of Paco, which causes Dino to drop the book. The kids are then attacked by both of the Watermans, but Jay quickly knocks off his mask, revealing the disfigured and mangled face of the pumpkin rabbit, looking suspiciously more canine than bunny. Jay then burns the book, causing the mannequins to all come to life and rip the Watermans apart. The two kids then pass out before being woken up by her father, the police chief, who gets them back into his car. But before leaving, they see two mannequins, which appear to both look exactly like the two Watermans. The short then ends with them driving away, with the bodies and ghosts of the children watching them as they drive away, and the jack-o'-lantern they lit at the very beginning rotting away. So before going any further, let's get this out of the way. I really like this episode of The Walton Files. Like, genuinely, it is one of the most interesting and different things that I had seen in analog horror for a while. This truly felt like the next step that analog horror should be making, and has been moving towards, leaving behind many of the cliches of the genre, and instead moving towards a full-fledged horror short rather than just a goofy little video. Like, seriously, there's almost no moments in this of the short that are just black screens with white text, and honestly, what a breath of fresh air compared to some of the other stuff I've had to look at in the past few months. Instead, this essentially drags analog horror more so back to its original horror roots, having a structure not much more different than you would see in traditional cinema. But it still keeps that analog horror edge to it, with the style still leaning heavily into those that are common within the subgenre, with the plenty of weird disturbing faces and long scares. There's hardly any jump scares within this, and honestly didn't find myself startled at all, instead mainly just on edge while watching, as you could really sense the palpable danger that these kids had gotten themselves into. Then there's the story. It's a story we've seen 1,000 times in horror now. A group of friends go to a supposedly haunted and creepy house within a neighborhood, but there's something evil truly going on within it. This is something that's been done in horror for decades, but it does its own twist on it, coming across more supernatural than many takes on it, without leaning too far away from the lore that was already built up within the mysterious house. But unlike the Walton Files, this sticks to a more grounded approach, which I know is kind of funny considering the story involves zombie talking animals killing children and bringing them back to life in a satanic ritual, but you just gotta trust me on this. It's grounded in the sense that it's relatable. I know with living in suburban neighborhoods, you would always hear about the house in the neighborhood that was evil or haunted, and there would be tons of rumors surrounding it. And there also were tons of stranger danger stories you'd be exposed to as a kid of children being kidnapped or killed to scare you into staying indoors, and this short does a good job in playing into all those. I can really tell how much the short has been influenced by the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, as the plot follows a very similar structure to it, with a group of people going into a house they shouldn't have, and I believe that even the body's outfit might be inspired by Leatherface, but I might be stretching slightly here. And then there's the scares. The scares in this are genuinely spectacular and some of the best I've seen in an analog horror short in quite a while. While none of these are blow out of the water frightening, each of them is extremely effective at conveying what is needed. One of my personal favorite scares in the short is when Jay is hiding behind the cupboard as you hear Ralph's voice. You know what's going to happen, as we the audience already know that Ralph has been killed by the rabbit. This of course is a perfect display and almost textbook example of the Hitchcock suspense tactic, as he was known for giving the audience all the information of what was going on, but leaving the characters themselves in the dark. And this scene does that, and it allows the suspense to flow in ways that many other analog horror series are unable to achieve, as it makes you wonder if Jay will really be able to get out of here alive. And then there's Ducky. I don't know what about it creeped me out so much while watching, but I think for me personally, it was seeing this innocent child around this horrific amalgamation, which made it so unsettling to me, but that's just might be me. It also has the trademark of a good analog horror series, with spectacular and creepy audio design throughout, with the soundscapes on display here leaving you on the edge of your seat, as the video almost seems like an assault on your ears. It also has a spectacular usage of creepy old music, which I loved in things like Mandela Catalog, as there's something just so off-putting and creepy about older music, and the short uses it at some points to a spectacular degree. For example, the usage of When the Saints Come Marching In is quite creepy and off-putting, especially when it's revealed where the sound is coming from, that of course being another mutilated body of a child. And speaking of the bodies of children, which is a funny anecdote to say, this short does exactly what I've been talking about in my Urban Spook videos. It shows horrific and disturbing imagery, but it does it in a way that actually makes sense and doesn't really contrive and make it just edgy. This is exactly what I was meaning by you have to have substance behind it. There's a reason to care. But let's continue. The pacing of it is almost perfect, as it doesn't feel too short or too long, and seems to have just the perfect amount of time for telling the story that they were making. None of it really overstayed its welcome, and all of the scares were paced and dispersed in a way that made it feel like almost a haunted house attraction. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that it's perfect. It's not, of course, but nothing's perfect. While a lot of the scares were well executed, many of them were extremely predictable, and that might not bother anyone, but this is just something that bothers me personally. A lot of the setups for the scares had been done before, and so because of that, it made almost every one of the scares extremely predictable, but this is honestly just me nitpicking a bit and is more personal. I know some people are going to complain about the animation, but honestly, it doesn't bother me too much. Even the parts where it looks a little wonky, mainly because it feels like a style that would make sense in the era it's supposed to have been made in. The weird almost stop motion style feels very 80s in its aesthetic, and so honestly it makes sense to me and why it's designed that way, so it doesn't bother me too much. However, some parts of it are still a little bit wonky and not intriguing or original. Sometimes it comes across too much like Texas Chainsaw Massacre but for kids, and that can be a little annoying as it doesn't go all the way for me to be something completely different. But that, once again, could just be me being super nitpicky, but that's just things that stand out to me. And with all that being said, although I did thoroughly enjoy this one, coming up with a rating for it, I really couldn't give it anything higher than an 8 out of 10. Mind you, this is my analog horror scale, which is much different than my scale for actual horror films, as those have much more to grade off of. So an 8 on this scale would translate to roughly a 7 or a 6 on my film scale, for reference for people who think this is too high of a score. And for the people who think this score is too low, mind you, this is the second highest score I've given an analog horror video so far, behind only the oldest Myuu for reference. Hello everyone. Before beginning, I want to say I'm not an inherently negative person, and I don't want to give off the impression that I dislike everything, but man, do some things seem to test my patience while I'm watching them. And this new analog horror series that stars Batman by Siltrix happens to be one of those series that have tested my patience the most as of recent, as it seems to accentuate all the problems I've had with analog horror for a while now. And while I thought series like Urban Spook were bad because of the shocking content with absolutely no substance, and 606-2006 was bad to the usage of real people, and the Boiled one was middle of the road due to the lack of cohesive story compared to the good monster design, I still think they all had some good things going for them, with Urban Spook and the Boiled one especially both having amazing artwork to go along with it. However, this series was just straight up bad in almost every single way. And I do not say that lightly, as I always try to give something positive about each series, but I was not able to find quite literally anything positive about it. And the reason this has me so worried is I've been seeing a lot of horror reaction channels propping this series up as the next big thing within analog horror and as the scariest series we're going to see in a while. And in order to explain why I think this doesn't work, I'm going to go episode by episode explaining why I think each one of these goes wrong. But before getting into all that, remember if you like this video to like it, and then if you are new here, subscribe, and if you really like this video, hit the bell. And I want to hear your opinions on the series down below, and let me know whether you think I'm wrong or if I'm right. Now let's get on with the explanation. The first episode, which is called The Bat Incident, tells of Arkham Asylum being put on lockdown due to the Batman going on a killing massacre within the facility. It then describes the deaths of Killer Croc, the Man-Bat, and Poison Ivy, who were all patients at the Arkham Asylum. It then shows an artist's rendition of Batman, which very clearly is just to give off a creepy vibe to the story that is being described. Then we start to see graphic depictions of how Batman murdered all 3 patients, with the only patient, which is called Patient Zero, surviving the attack from Batman. However, because of being left alive, the man goes even crazier and draws this rendition of the Batman. Next, we see a message from Police Commissioner Jim Gordon describing why he thinks the Batman is Bruce Wayne as he talks about the murders of Bruce's parents. However, it's shown that Bruce has taken control over the video at the end, as he calls everything that Jim said lies. Then in the next video called GCPD Instructional Presentation, we see a presentation from the Gotham City Police Department talking about how Batman has been stealing kids and to keep an eye out for the Batman. Then the video after that is called The Truth, describing how Bruce has slowly gone insane and that he is actually taking some sort of drug that's caused him to lose his mind, as we hear an audio recording from Bruce. And in the audio, we start to hear what sounds like ramblings of a madman as he starts to describe himself as the judge, the jury, and the executioner. Next is the missing persons broadcast, where we see that a bunch of people have been stolen by Batman before once again being interrupted by Bruce by saying it's too late and showing a group of caskets underneath the house and a house on fire.
And in the latest episode called Names, we find out the house that was on fire was the Wayne Manor, where an investigator goes into the caves under the manor and finds a list of names before being chased out by a weird group of people stuck underneath the house. While running out, he seems to run into Batman, who just seems to stand there and stare at him. This confuses him as he gets scared that he might be the next one stolen. It then cuts to a missing persons poster, heavily implying that the narrator himself was also taken by Batman. And that is all the series has so far. So now let's get into I truly mean this when I say I try to stay as positive as I can, but when I say that I was not having a good time while watching this series, I truly mean it. This series was definitely a slog for me to get through, so seeing all the people praising it just baffles me beyond belief. I've seen many analog horror series over the years and have read many creepypastas as well, and this one felt like you could have placed it on the creepypasta wiki back in the day and it would have fit just right in. And I don't mean that in the positive light, I mean that in like the sense that it uses all the same tropes and scare tactics that a lot of the old bad creepypastas used to use. And also falls into a lot of the bad writing traps that creepypastas also found themselves falling into. Now, to get into why I dislike it, I think I need to go episode by episode of what stood out to me as just being so wrong with it. So first, there's the Bat Incident. With the Bat Incident, we get introduced to this new horrifying version of Batman going on a killing spree within Arkham Asylum, and the very first thing that stood out to me was the editing of the shorts. Because while the editing was definitely flashing and eye-catching while I was watching it, it stood out to me in a way that made it seem like it was trying too hard to feel seen. With a lot of analog horror, you really shouldn't be noticing how the editing is put together because it should feel like one cohesive piece. It shouldn't stand out as its own thing. There's a reason why editing is usually considered the silent part of the art form. And that's because if the editing is really standing out, it's removing your attention away from what you should really be focusing on, which is of course the story. And in the first place, the whole thing about analog horror is that it's supposed to try and feel like an old VHS tape, as it plays off the weird and creepy aesthetic a lot of those old PSA VHSs had that we were shown in school, for example. But this didn't really feel like that. Instead, it just felt like a TikTok edit trying to emulate the style of an analog horror. It truly felt like they just made it and placed a filter over it, and that was it. And the constant screen shaking was distracting way too much, as there wasn't any eeriness to it and instead just felt like it was just overtaking what we were watching. Then there's the description of the murders, which harkens back to creepypastas like Jeff the Killer for me, with the over-detailed descriptions of the murders for absolutely no reason. Once again, just like I said with Urban Spook, this series tries from the very first episode to try and scare with shock value, but it shows way too much to actually be scary. Extremely graphic descriptions of violence can be scary, but graphic descriptions are only really scary if we care about the characters that are being shown, otherwise less is generally more when it comes to horror. This is especially true for analog horror, which is usually made for a super low budget where you can't really show anything off that will scare the audience with what you are given. So generally leaving more up to the audience's imagination will really benefit the creation, and they don't really do this at all within this short. Let's since this decide to go with the extremely graphic depictions route. If we cared about what was being described in that way, we might actually care about what we were seeing and be a little bit frightened. But to start the very first episode off that way causes the series to fall completely flat for me. And then we get the depictions of Batman, which also completely fell within the stretched out face we have seen 1,000 times since the Mandela catalog came out, with this face being particularly atrocious. I quite literally laughed out loud when the face was shown on screen, as it looked exactly like that photo of Germa that has been shared 1,000 times but with a Batman costume on. It was made even more laughable for me with the usage of what sounded like Pokemon music, which completely took me out of the story all the way. See, using royalty-free music is fine, but the problem is when it's so recognizable that you can recognize it from something else, it kind of ruins it for other people. Especially when that thing that you're using it from is usually associated with a kid's game, not something that is frightening whatsoever. The next episode also didn't do anything for me, because is Batman supposed to be supernatural in some sort of way in this universe, or did he just mess with the video that we saw? This doesn't get explained, and that's fine, but it just seems like they just wanted to find a way to use the common tropes that we've seen 1,000 times already in other analog horror, and besides that, nothing really happened in the episode. It just tells the story of Bruce Wayne's family being murdered like every other Batman story, not really much for me to add here. However, the next episode for me was my complete tune-out, as after that point, I didn't think the series could really be saved. We have seen this tired old trope of children being stolen for at least a decade now, with 1999, and speaking of 1999, this episode seemed like it was just trying to do what it did, with like a parental figure stealing kids and killing them off, but did it in a way that's way less interesting, which made it fall completely apart for me. How many times are we going to see this trope of the crazed man stealing children, especially in poorly written and badly put together stories? It falls into the same camp that I put urban spook in. It seems like the creator is just trying to make something that will shock the viewer, but their writing is so poor and full of tropes that it completely comes across as over the top and ridiculous, but caused me to almost give up on the series completely. Then with the truth, I've never seen a more unneeded and unnecessary episode of an analog horror series than this. If this had been completely removed, what we would have lost was almost nothing. This episode doesn't bring anything new to the table and covers the exact same things that the Jim Gordon audio logs already covered earlier. I don't really get what the creator was trying to do here, but it was already shown it was Bruce. What does this episode add? We get the monologue, but it doesn't really do anything. It's just another whispery text-to-speech bot talking about their plans, which we've already seen played out before. It's not frightening, and frankly, it's just boring and does absolutely nothing for me whatsoever, and I think above everything, being boring is one of the worst things a film can do. I would rather a series be so bad it's good that it's at least entertaining with how bad it is, but that isn't even funny. It's just super boring with absolutely nothing being added. And with the next episode, The Missing Persons Broadcast, it's more of the same, with detailing the people that had gotten stolen being shown buried in the caves underneath the Wayne house, and it makes me ask, what is even the point of this series anymore? Yes, we know that Batman looks to be killing and stealing kids. Okay, but what else? It's been stuck on this platform for 3 episodes, but it's not explaining anything, it's just meandering there. Nothing new is presented in this episode besides the mansion being set on fire, but it's just frankly annoying how completely stagnant this series is. With each episode we seem to get more of the same information we have known for episodes now, but before revealing one little piece of the story, but that piece doesn't really change much, it doesn't reveal a reason or a piece for solving the mystery, it's just more of the same old shit. With each episode, we seem to get more of the same information we have known for episodes now, before revealing one little piece of the story, but that piece doesn't really change much. It doesn't reveal a piece to the mystery or a reason. Instead, it's just the same old shit we've seen for the past 3 episodes. And once again, Names does the exact same thing, with the only new piece of information that is shown is that there's missing kids being kept in the cave, but once again, no reasoning is given. It's just the same as the rest of the series. The kids being down there is just supposed to be shocking and creepy, but it doesn't really give a reasoning or explain why they're down there. It's just, oh, there's kids down there. And the story is just the same old tired tropes over and over again, with an occasional jump scare thrown in. And speaking of those jump scares, every single one of them fails to be scary. And I don't like jump scares, and they don't really get me, but I don't see how any of these jump scares would ever actually get someone. It's generally just some creepy music in the face stretching we've seen 1,000 times before. They're not scary anymore. And you can see them coming from a mile away and drag you out of the story completely while watching, and just make the story wallow in its failed scare attempts every single time. Now, what are my thoughts on the series as a whole? Well, I think this frankly needs a lot of work in order to be saved. It falls completely flat in many ways to me and falls into the same old tropes that we've been seeing since the 2000s. And many of the episodes don't add anything to the story at all, coming across as just filler and nothing else. And because of all that, I feel like I have to give this the lowest score I've ever given to an analog horror series in any of my videos, and I feel really bad about doing this, because even by analog horror series, this one is awful, but I really don't like giving low scores, but I think in order to get through the point that this is not what the direction that analog horror should be heading into, I need to give this a low score so people can see that this is not what you should be doing. But this is still all my opinion, so you can completely disregard this, it doesn't matter, I'm just a YouTube reviewer. But because of all the reasons I listed, I think I need to give this my lowest score of a 1 out of 10.
I remember a couple months ago being excited by the way analog horror was going on YouTube, as we seemed to be in a period of greatness within the genre, and it only seemed to be getting better and better with time, unlike most versions of YouTube horror. And it almost seemed like the genre could do no wrong, as almost every single thing being released at that time was just pushing things forward even more than the last. From the Backrooms, to the Walton Files, then to the Mandela Catalog and Greylock, and then finally the Oldest View and The Man in the Suit. It seemed like almost everything in the genre was made for a certain person, with bountiful fresh ideas that were just creative and allowed your mind to wander. And there was just so many creative and new ideas that the genre was just game changing at the point. There was just so much creativity going on that allowed you to have a horror fix within YouTube. But like everything else before it, the quality began to rapidly decline, and I think I saw this firsthand with Urban Spook series. The Painter follows a police investigation into the murders caused by two men who brutalized many people in their path as they try to kill everyone they spot along the way, and with every body they find, they would find a painting along with it. And this would be the main draw of the series, as the paintings were what people were coming to see. The story itself was more secondhand. But oh boy, is there really something to talk about when it comes to the story of Urban Spook series. I've grown up watching horror films and reading creepypastas. I've seen some of the most gritty and darkest films known to man. Trust me when I say that most things don't gross me out anymore, as I've gotten to the point that almost nothing is shocking to me anymore from a film perspective. With one caveat, which is of course that is only purely for shock value and nothing else. Many films do stuff purely for shock value, and at a certain point when it's just shock value, it won't stick with you as long. And for shock value to be done correctly, it has to be done in a context that makes sense. First, never glorify the violence. If you glorify the violence, it's no longer shocking. You're just being gross for the sake of being gross, and that to me automatically makes the film I'm watching uninteresting and not worth watching. And the horror has to be somewhat believable, and if it's too over the top, it will completely drag me out of the story and make me uninterested in what I'm seeing. One of my favorite examples of a film that does shock value perfect is, I think, Goodnight Mommy from 2014. While what they are doing to her in the film is awful and terrible things that are shocking to the viewer, it won't stick with you as long without the context surrounding the film. And the context surrounding the film, with it being her own children doing this to her, makes the film much more shocking and will stick with you longer than if it was just some random people doing it to her. And the violence itself in the film is not too over the top, so while it is very shocking to see, it won't take you out of it by being too unrealistic, because you can believe what you're seeing. Urban Spook, however, did the complete opposite of this by making it so that every single act of violence in it was so extreme and over the top, while making the killers out to be uncatchable godlike villains that are able to do things that almost no human would be able to understand. And it doesn't help that the context surrounding it is so paper dry that it doesn't make the violence shocking, it just makes it seem tone deaf and frankly annoying. Which leads to my second point against Urban Spook, which is substance. It feels like I've seen the Urban Spook story 200 times at this point, besides the main draw to the series, which is the paintings. And to give the series some credit, I think the paintings are genuinely great, and I could tell that they are done by an extremely talented artist. But when the only thing carrying your story is the paintings, then it has some problems, and there's almost nothing going on within the story, as every single episode seems to follow the exact same structure as the other, to the point where it becomes so formulaic that by the end of it, it is close to unwatchable. I can summarize almost every single episode the same way. We get text detailing an over-the-top gruesome murder, then a painting, then some more info on the killers. That's it. Nothing else going on here. And after a certain point, I feel like the series just gets boring and nothing else. I would have made a whole video talking about why I dislike Urban Spook, but I feel like it's already been done to death at this point. Everyone knows why Urban Spook is bad. And for good reason. The series is not good. But I think what we're seeing in analog horror right now is just so much worse than anything that Urban Spook did. But I know you're probably tired about hearing about Urban Spook, so let's move on to the next part. While I didn't exactly hate Urban Spook, after Urban Spook I did start to worry, as I had seen this start to happen before. I had seen this happen with creepypastas, mascot horror, and the Backrooms, where the first ideas were great and generally intriguing, but each one seemed to just get worse and worse after the other. I think I explained this fear of mine best in my video of what I thought killed the liminal spaces in the Backrooms, where I explained that I think when a genre of horror gets too popular, we see many bad actors come in where they try to write and create things in the same exact veins as the things that are already popular in order to try and get popular themselves. And I expressed this fear as well in my video on the boiled one, because the boiled one also seemed to be falling into those traps that I had been seeing. And I knew when I saw Urban Spook that it was exactly what they were doing from the very beginning, and I knew it was only going to get worse from there, and oh boy, it has. Before we go any further, I'd like to say thank you to all the people that have subscribed to my channel. I can't believe I'm at 900 subs. That's just insane to me. Literally last week I was talking about how excited I was that I had 800 subscribers. Now I'm already at 900, which is insane. And I'm so glad that you guys are liking the content that I'm putting out, and that makes me so happy. And also, if you guys are new to the channel, if you like this video, remember to like and subscribe to the channel. And if you watched the video all the way through, leave a comment down below with your thoughts on the video, but also welcome to the team. And with us hitting 900 subscribers, that just makes me so unbelievably happy, and I'm so glad that we were able to get to this point. Now let's continue with the actual video. Back then, with things starting to get worse, I started to get worried, but Greylock and the man in the suit were also reaching its height, so I started to put my concerns down as me just overreacting. But things just kept getting worse and worse with time. I started seeing more and more analog horror series that got more and more derivative as they continued, and while I will say there are many gems still in the pile, they're getting covered by more and more rocks inside of it. There were some I still had good feelings on, like Piggy Soda's analog horror I felt was a breath of fresh air, because while it didn't change the formula to an extreme degree, I still found the videos to be quite disturbing and intriguing enough to keep me watching. And frankly, the scares were still scary. They weren't just like big spooky faces that would come up and pop up every couple seconds. Then there were some I was more mixed on, with the boiled one being the primary example I have, but I already have a video explaining my thoughts on the boiled one, so if you want to see my opinions on the boiled one, click the link in the description below. Then there were some that weren't great, but you could tell were made from love, which I didn't really take offense with, as I could tell they were trying their hardest. Then there were some that just started getting plain bad, like Void Descendants, which has almost all of the bad details that old creepypastas had, including the hyper-realistic faces and dark backgrounds, as well as reversed music. Like seriously, we're getting to Squidward, Zeus, and Dead Bart tier creepypasta writing here. These videos might have done well in 2010, but in 2024, it doesn't really fit with most of analog horror. It just feels like we're doing creepypastas again with like AI voices. And I still find it funny that we're getting creepypasta tropes in the modern era, instead of just coming up with original creepy ideas. But now they have gotten to the point of just being plain upsetting. While creepypastas just kept getting worse and worse over time, it never got to the point of using the deaths of real life people as a form of shock horror with absolutely no substance behind it. And none upset me more than the SpongeBob analog horror. This right here is just unacceptable and was my breaking point with analog horror, and there's no going around it. No beating around the bush. No. Just no. I don't think creepypastas ever hit this level of low, unless I just have a really bad memory, which I very well could, and so if I am, just correct me. This low is just plain wrong. Making a film essentially mocking the death of a real life person is just going way, way too far. No one even wants this, and rightfully I see people getting extreme backlash to this series, but I think we might just have gone too far with everything as a whole. And while I will never support the harassment of creators, I think that he just went too far on this. And in no way in my mind, this was an acceptable thing to do. It just seems to go a little bit too far. I think we need to reel it back a little bit. I think that horror needs to focus more on what makes something scary instead of just trying to shock the audience. And I think analog horror has strayed a little bit too far into the trying to shock the audience category. It's no longer trying to scare me, it's instead trying to shock me and disturb me. I love a lot of analog horror, and I love what it did for the horror genre on YouTube, but I think we need to give it a break before it gets even worse. Because it seems like every single new analog horror series that blows up gets more and more derivative than the last, and is falling into the same traps that creepypasta and mascot horror fell into. There's a reason that each new analog horror series seems to be getting more and more backlash, and because each one is just getting worse and worse, and then using the death of a real life people in order to be spooky is absolutely going too far. And because of that, I think I am done with new analog horror series for now, as unless there's an actually good series that comes out, then I am done with it. And unless we see something truly game-changing, I don't see myself watching more of these, unless there's something like in the past that was really good that I missed out on. And I don't really find myself comfortable with covering this type of horror if they're going to be doing shocking things like this for no reason and seemingly mocking the death of the creator. And with a lot of new series, we are literally falling into the exact same tropes that we saw with creepypastas, and I'm just kind of tired of it, as we're getting back to the same old tropes of the hyper-realistic blood and creepy faces being used constantly. I might come back to it at some point, but for now I'm giving analog horror a break. I might still cover some older series that I think that are still worth covering, but I don't think I know if I feel comfortable associating myself with a group that thinks mocking the deaths of the creator is okay. We've all probably seen a horror video or film using this trope. There's Smile, the Mandela Catalog, Smile Tapes, Urban Spook, and even the Walton Files to a certain extent. And if you know this media, you probably figured out what I'm talking about, but first off, a trope for anyone uninformed is a concept that is used throughout a genre or medium to the point where it's recognized explicitly as a pattern. However, like everything else, if it becomes overused, then it will become a cliche, which is more of an annoyance rather than a positive, and horror definitely has it a lot more than any other genres. Analog horror is no different, with many tropes and cliches being extremely prevalent within the genre, which I have shared my annoyance with on multiple occasions, but one trope annoys me over the others by far, and if you watched my videos in the past, you could probably guess which one it is. And that, of course, is the usage of distorted faces to trigger the uncanny valley. This may surprise you that this annoys me, as I've made a whole video on a branch of horror that uses tons of the uncanny valley and why it frightens me so much. But at this point, this particular branch of it just doesn't really work for me anymore. So what is the uncanny valley? The uncanny valley is one of the main scare tactics you'll see in horror, as it's one of the few things within humanity that we all feel, as it seems to be sort of a defense system within our bodies. The uncanny valley is a feeling where we can tell that something appears to act, behave, and may even look like us, but something is slightly off or different about them, which causes a fear response. If you really want to frighten yourself, I pose this. Why exactly do we have this fear is not known. So maybe there was something in history that caused our brain to build this fear in order for us to survive. But what possible thing in our history could have caused us to have a fear of something that looks human, but isn't? But hey, that's just a possible explanation. Don't think about it too much if you don't want to. But the uncanny valley is extremely prevalent within horror and is by far one of the most prevalent tropes within the genre. Films like Invasion of the Body Snatchers and The Thing are built around that trope, as that fear of something looking human and not being human is so strong. For example, within Invasion of the Body Snatchers, we see this throughout the film, as the people that are replaced when they come back still appear human and look like the people that are replaced, but they just act off. They don't act human. They act like something pretending to be human, but they aren't entirely human. In the decades before, this fear mainly came out of the fear that others around you weren't really who they say they were, with the 50s and the 80s using the genre more than any other decades due to the Cold War, when people feared that others were communist. And usually within good filmmaking, that horror is based around something, as there's just something so frightening about the unknown and what others can be like behind closed doors. And usually the feeling is played off to show weird things about society as a whole and how everything can just feel off from time to time, and usually it can be done masterfully in examples like Invasion of the Body Snatchers and The Thing. But it's generally seen as a harder thing to pull off usually, because it's something that's really difficult to show, as it's really a hard feeling to describe in the first place. However, the modern context isn't really following with it, as one of the biggest uses of it recently has been through distorted human faces, especially within analog horror.
Who are you? Get away from me! No!
When I first found the original Mandela Catalog, I thought it was an intriguing concept, and honestly, this scare and overthrow actually somewhat got me the first time while watching. And in all honesty, when I saw that many more analog horror series were coming out due to the series' sudden popularity and similar stuff was coming out, I was somewhat excited to have another wave of horror YouTube blow up, but oh my god. I have seen the exact same scare type as the one in Overthrown hundreds of times now, with every single analog horror series using the stretched out face archetype to convey a scare, and it just isn't scary anymore. And it's not like I can exactly get mad at the Mandela catalog for pioneering the scare, because at the time of its release it was somewhat original and different at the time, but now every single time that I watch one in there is a stretched out face or distorted face, and it just isn't scary anymore. This isn't analog horror though either. I mean, look at Smile, don't get on me, I know that these films are just fine. And then there's Truth or Dare, which is not fine, and there's a ton more at this point, but listen, all of them would just be a waste of time. I blame Black Hole Sun for this whole situation. But with horror, one thing that people always seem to forget is that overexposure makes something less and less scary with time. So with horror, originality I think really is key, as if your scare isn't original and looks like hundreds of other scares people have already seen, then people will not really give your story a chance. It really shows a lack of creativity when you show the same thing that everyone else is doing. This is why in my video on the Batman analog horror I went so deep onto the trope, because while on its own it doesn't really mean much, in the product as a whole, it really exemplifies the lack of creativity over anything else. For horror, creativity in the scare is the most important part, as horror is all built up to that. If your scare is unoriginal and unfrightening, then it just won't work. That's what I was going on about last week with the No Players Online ripoff, because it just is the same exact scare as No Players Online. It's not original, it's not creative, and it's just not scary. And almost every single one of these series or films overuse the hell out of it. It should just be slow enough that it sticks with you, but holding on it for so long just loosens the scare as you have more exposure to it. And as I stated earlier, the more exposure you have to the scare, the less frightening it is. And that's not to say that there are ways that are original and disturbing anymore. There of course is ways, and we'll get onto that later. But when you do the exact same scare and styles as the others, then it just isn't interesting anymore. Take the Smile tapes for example. The story is decently interesting and creepy, but my god, the scare looks exactly like the German sus face, and I can't get that out of my head. Like, it looks exactly like it. It doesn't even look any different. And once again, it's the exact same scare as the Mandela catalog. It's just another distorted stretched out face that we've seen thousands of times. It's lost its touch and just doesn't have the effect it once has. But are there ways to do it effectively? Now, despite the title of this section, this is not a how-to video. If you really want to learn how to do your own creepy and effective scare, then honestly, practice makes perfect. So if you want to make your own scare with a distorted face, get working on it and create something new and interesting. I cannot reiterate enough that practice makes perfect. If you want to make something, make it. It really will make a difference. You just need to keep practicing and you will create something original and unique. It's all just practice. But this is more looking at past examples of ones that created a disturbing and creepy face originally without trying to replicate a scare that has already been done to death. Starting off with analog horror, which uses the trope much more often than any other horror medium by far. I would put the Bullet one as a creature design and distorted face done right. There's just something so off-putting about the design of the creature, as its humanoid in appearance speaks like a human being, but it just isn't. It's not a human. It's something else. This is something that appears human somewhat, but it isn't. It's just this weird amalgamation of human-like parts, but it speaks like a human, but it's just not. While it isn't the distorted smile that many others are using, I think that's precisely what makes this creature design interesting and different. It doesn't follow the cliches of the creature designs within the subgenre, but still follows the things that fall within the monster building and world building of the subgenre. It achieves the same effect. This is precisely what I mean by doing a scare that achieves the same effect as a distorted face, that being the uncanny valley through distortion, but making something out of it and original. Then there's the Walton Files, which, while many may be mixed in many regards to people due to its somewhat low production quality, which I really don't know what people expect. It's YouTube, not a multi-million-dollar production. Still does a good job at creating an original and disturbing facial distortion that achieves a similar effect by using its limitations to a great effect. See, due to its lower production quality, the faces that are shown, although they are portraying a human being, doesn't exactly look human. This is done to great effect, as it makes the video uncomfortable from the get-go, rather than the atmosphere needing to build up around the scare as much. Then when the faces actually do start to get distorted due to them being killed and used within the animatronic, as we see the already uncanny valley faces becoming even more uncanny as I recognize them as human, but at the same time also can tell that they are not, just makes that scenes much more intense than they were before. And in all honesty, while at times I think the writing of the series can be somewhat lacking and the acting being interesting sometimes to say the least, I think the series is the best portrayal of said scare that I've seen thus far. It doesn't hold on the faces for so long that they lose their value, instead using it in rapid cuts to portray a horrific situation, and that's it. And I don't say that lightly, as there's really so many usages of the scare, as every single one of them seems to use it. Then there's the way that many films have used it correctly, with one immediate example that I've talked about at length before, but I really cannot emphasize enough, that being the I saw her face scare within the ring. It's such a shocking effective scare that it honestly sticks with you more than any of the other ones I talked about. It doesn't hold around for too long for your brains to fill in the gaps and find it less scary, instead being so fast that your brain can't even fully process it, letting your brain do the heavy lifting of filling in all the gaps, making it scarier than any filmmaker possibly could. That's what makes this face so scary. It still looks human, but at the same time it isn't, and that's what makes it frightening. As mentioned earlier as well, Invasion of the Body Snatchers does this archetype really well, with the ending being standout of this, as we see multiple people who are on the surface level appear human, but every single thing that they do just seems off. There's something inhuman about the way they behave, and your brain can't really figure out why, and that's what makes the final scare that much more effective.